So, there is an exam called the ELAT exam, and in the ELAT exam you will have a choice of 5 or 6 pairs of passages. No. There is an exam called the ELAT exam, which is used particularly by universities like Oxford and Cambridge to assess English competence and whether or not you're going to make a good student if you're going to study English literature or one of the art subjects like that, which is dependent on writing. And one of the skills that you need to master is the ability to write a good analysis of a passage. So you're looking for the tricks, the imagery, the symbolism. We don't really want you to be telling the story. Now, I thought, as an introduction to a number of programs that I'm going to make, a number of videos that I'm going to make about ELAT, that I would start with just one passage. In the ELAT exam, you're going to compare 2 passages. You choose those 2 passages out of 9 or so texts which the examiner provides. And you probably won't recognize any of these texts. That's the point. You're not supposed to give context. I'm going to give you context here because I think this is an interesting passage. I plucked it out of a book that maybe many of you have read, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And right in the centre of the book, there is this passage in chapter 19. And I'm going to read it to you first, and I'll put the text behind me so that you can read along as I read. Tess has gone to work in Farmer Crick's farm as a milkmaid. And into the farm comes this middle-class man, son of a vicar, called Angel Clare. And Angel Clare has many ideas about what he wants to do. He's also a little bit religiously naughty. He renounces the resurrection. But as we're going to find out later on in the book, he's still obsessed with certain standards of purity and morality. So he thinks he's being very modern, but in fact he clings to the traditions that he's already inherited. This passage is full of symbolism, and when you're reading this passage, you should be immediately aware of the symbolism of a garden. If we say a garden, we think really of the Garden of Eden. That's our starting point. So thinking of that, let's just read through this very quickly, and then we'll draw a few pointers, and then you will see where you are and how you can focus and write something creative and analytical. How can you appreciate this piece? It was a typical summer evening in June, the atmosphere being in such delicate equilibrium and so transmissive that inanimate objects seemed endowed with 2 or 3 senses, if not 5. There was no distinction between the near and the far, and an auditor felt close to everything within the horizon. The soundlessness impressed her as a positive entity rather than as the mere negation of noise. It was broken by the strumming of strings. Tess had heard these notes in the attic above her head, dim, flattened, constrained by their confinement. They had never appealed to her as now, when they wandered in the still air with a stark quality like that of nudity. To speak absolutely, both instrument and execution were poor. But the relative is all, and as she listened, Tess, like a fascinated bird, could not leave the spot. Far from leaving, she drew up towards the performer, keeping behind the hedge that he might not guess her presence. The outskirt of the garden in which Tess found herself had been left uncultivated for some years, and was now damp and rank with juicy grass which sent up mists of pollen at a touch, and with tall blooming weeds emitting offensive smells, weeds whose red and yellow and purple hues formed a polychrome as dazzling as that of cultivated flowers. She went stealthily as a cat through this profusion of growth, gathering cuckoo's spittle on her skirts, cracking snails that were underfoot, staining her hands with thistle milk and slug slime, and rubbing off upon her naked arms sticky blights which, though snow white on the apple tree trunks, made madder stains on her skin. Thus she drew quite near to Clare, still unobserved of him. Tess was conscious of neither time nor space. The exaltation which she had described as being producible at will by gazing at a star came now without any determination of hers. She undulated upon the thin notes of the second-hand harp, and their harmonies passed like breezes through her, bringing tears into her eyes. The floating pollen seemed to be his notes made visible, and the dampness of the garden the weeping of the garden's sensibility. Though near nightfall, the rank-smelling weed flowers glowed as if they would not close for intentness, and the waves of colour mixed with the waves of sound. The light which still shone was derived mainly from a large hole in the western bank of cloud. It was like a piece of day left behind by accident, dusk having closed in everywhere. He concluded his plaintive melody, a very simple performance, demanding no great skill, and she waited, thinking another might be begun. But tired of playing, he had desultorily come round the fence and was rambling up behind her. Tess, her cheeks on fire, moved away furtively, as if hardly moving at all. Angel, however, saw her light summer gown, and he spoke, his low tones reaching her, though he was some distance off. "What makes you draw off in that way, Tess?" said he. "Are you afraid?" So a few points that strike me immediately and that must have struck you. The first is this Garden of Eden image, but did you notice that twice in the passage Thomas Hardy uses the word rank? And there's a wonderful line in Hamlet during the first soliloquy. "'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank in nature possess it merely." Lines 135 to 137, the first soliloquy. And he's talking about the rotting vegetation in his home. His uncle has taken the crown, has married his mother, and this image of decay is now enveloping the court of Elsinore. But something is emerging. Things grow to seed. Yes, they grow to decay, but also that idea of seed, something is coming out. And we get that in abundance in this passage. The garden, the fall of man. This leads to the exile, sickness, decay, death. Did you notice the word blight? Blight is another word for disease. This idea of the polychrome. The polychrome thing, this idea of colour and sound. This might be something like synesthesia. Synesthesia is that condition where you start seeing sound as colour. There was a wonderful musician called Scriabin who wrote music for orchestra and colour organ, and so you'd have somebody thumping away on a colour organ producing these colours during a symphony. And of course Disney picks up that idea in his film of Fantasia. So different chords, different notes produce different colours. But the overwhelming sense in this passage is one of sensuality gone wrong. So you have the thought of this romantic image. An angel, Angel Clare. What instrument does an angel traditionally play? He plays the harp, but he's playing it badly. And the person who's in love with him, Tess, is in a garden looking up at him, presumably, or watching him. She's sort of peeping Tom. And in order not to be seen, she's crawling through the undergrowth, and she is getting completely covered in gook and grime and globules of snails slime and slug slime, and it's not only sort of physically unattractive, it smells as well. So this is a very sensual image of decay. And if you've got this image of decay, what is the symbolism? The symbolism is one of, here you're in a garden, but the garden is rotting. This is an image of pessimism, and of course Thomas Hardy is the most pessimistic writer, I think, in the English language. You see, he starts his novels off with something bad and then thinks, how can we make them worse? And Tess of the D'Urbervilles is a novel that is all about fate. And Tess is a victim of one bad thing after another. Also, think of all these other things which you got in this passage. Tess is conscious of neither time nor space. This is a sort of mystical idea that you might get in Wordsworth. But whereas Wordsworth is thinking in this sort of romantic image of the glories of nature, union with nature, Thomas Hardy actually gives you union with nature. It's sticky and smelly and not particularly nice. You're walking around and you're treading on snails. You're killing these animals. And the one thing which the one detail that you really must notice if you're going to write something about this passage is the pathetic fallacy, the weeping garden. But it's not weeping. It's not weeping necessarily with sadness. Well, it may be. I think you may see that in it. I was thinking it's like weeping. It's like the weeping of an open wound. This is a garden of earthly delights, but it's a garden of earthly delights painted by Hieronymus Bosch, with all these ghastly things hidden in the undergrowth. And of course, it's a garden with apple trees. And what is the tree in the centre of the Garden of Eden? Traditionally, it's an apple tree. Actually, it probably wasn't. It was probably a fig tree. But the delectable fruit. The delectable fruit. And in this case, I don't know whether the delectable fruit is supposed to be Angel Clare or Tess. But they are both destined for a fall. They're both destined for disaster. And look at the other things, like the music made visible with the pollen floating around Tess. So, if you're going to write an appreciation of this passage, the first thing to do is to read it carefully and let the richness of the imagery come out, and then make some notes, as we've just done. And then order your notes so that instead of going laboriously through the structure of the passage that Thomas Hardy has presented, you can present it more thematically. I would suggest that you need at least one paragraph in your appreciation on religious imagery. You definitely need a piece about sensuality. And you need to spend some time looking at the symbolism, the general symbolism and the imagery that Thomas Hardy uses. Maybe also the way that he uses words, the way he repeats words. The way he uses words in a novel in a poetic way. But it's the imagery, it's the symbolism which is so rich in this piece. So I hope I've given you some indication of where you might go if you are going to write an appreciation of a small passage. This, as I say, is a passage I took at random from Thomas Hardy's novel, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. In the next week, I'm going to look at some of the ELAT past papers and analyse some of those for you, and also give you some pointers about how you might link one passage to another. Here, in a very wicked and underhand way, I've already done a link for you between Thomas Hardy and Shakespeare's Hamlet. So, you know, things will leap out at you as you read a passage. Let those things leap out, but always read with a pen in one hand and make notes. So there we are. Introduction to ELAT by Tim. Thank you.